Ambassador Zekthara adjusted her environmental suit for the third time that morning. The yellow biohazard warning lights on her helmet casting an ominous glow across the monitoring station's sterile walls. Through the reinforced observation window, she stared at the verdant nightmare that humans inexplicably called the Pacific Northwest Forest. "I still cannot comprehend it," she muttered to her aide, Lieutenant Velmore, who stood equally protected behind his own hazmat barrier. "The atmospheric readings are beyond catastrophic. Oxygen levels at 21% utterly toxic, nitrogen at 78%, and the spore count." She gestured weakly at her scanner. "The spore count defies all known safety parameters." The forest before them pulsed with what any civilized species would recognize as clear biological warfare. Massive trees reached skyward like organic missiles, their bark housing countless parasites and fungi. Beneath their canopy, a carpet of decomposing matter created a toxic soup of bacteria, mold, and unknown microorganisms. Every breath in that environment would be suicide for any reasonable life form. And yet, "Ambassador," Velmore's voice cracked. Through the comm system, "the humans are doing it again." Through their high-powered telescopes, they watched in horror as a family of humans deliberately walked into the biohazard zone. No environmental suits, no breathing apparatus, no protective gear whatsoever, except for some primitive fabric coverings and what appeared to be recreational footwear. The humans carried bundles of supplies on their backs, not emergency medical equipment or decontamination units, but what the Galactic Council's xenobiologists had identified as marshmallows, sleeping bags, and something called bug spray that was apparently meant to ward off the forest's numerous venomous arthropods. "They're setting up a temporary habitat," Velmore observed, his voice barely concealing panic. "In the middle of the contamination zone." Zekthara watched as the humans began assembling a primitive shelter. The adult male, designation Dad, actually touched the toxic bark of several trees with his bare hands, examining them for structural integrity. The adult female, Mom, spread a thin fabric barrier on the spore-infested ground and began arranging their supplies. Most disturbing of all, two juvenile humans ran freely through the undergrowth, their high-pitched vocalizations suggesting not distress, but pleasure. "Sir," called Technician Mordak from his monitoring station, "I'm reading massive exposure events. The humans are inhaling millions of fungal spores per minute. The smaller ones have made physical contact with at least 47 different toxic plant species. One of them just consumed a berry directly from a clearly poisonous shrub." Zekthara's breathing apparatus fogged with her panicked exhalations. She activated her emergency communication link to Earth's Human Liaison Office. "This is Ambassador Zekthara to Human Central Command," she broadcast. "We have a code red biological disaster in progress. Multiple humans have entered the quarantine zone. Request immediate evacuation protocols." The response came back in the characteristically calm tone that made humans so unnervingly unpredictable. "Oh, that's just the Johnson family on their camping trip. They do this every summer. No evacuation needed, but thanks for checking." "Every summer?" Zekthara's voice rose to a pitch that strained her translator. "You mean this is intentional?" "Yep, camping is a popular recreational activity. Nothing like breathing that fresh forest air and sleeping under the stars." Through the observation window, the humans had successfully erected their shelter. As darkness fell over the forest, bringing out nocturnal predators that should have sent any sane species fleeing, the humans created an open flame in the middle of their camp. They gathered around this fire, exposing themselves to smoke, carbon, monoxide, and thermal radiation, while consuming food heated over the toxic combustion. "They're telling stories," Velmore whispered in amazement. "In the middle of a Class 5 biohazard zone surrounded by lethal organisms, breathing poisonous air, they're telling stories and laughing." The juvenile humans had captured several of the forest's bioluminescent arthropods, creatures whose defensive toxins could dissolve most known metals, and were observing them with what appeared to be delight before gently releasing them back into the wild. When the local nocturnal predators began their hunting calls, sounds that registered on their equipment as spine-chilling howls of approaching death. The humans simply paused their conversation to listen. "Beautiful night sounds," Dad commented. "Really peaceful out here." Zekthara slumped against her monitoring console. In her 40 years of diplomatic service, she had encountered species that could survive in the vacuum of space, beings that thrived in pools of molten sulfur, and civilizations that had evolved in the crushing depths of gas-giant atmospheres. But never had she encountered a species that would voluntarily expose themselves to an environment that every scientific instrument screamed was designed to kill them, and then described the experience as relaxing. As the humans settled into their thin sleeping barriers, completely vulnerable to the hundreds of toxic creatures that prowled the night forest, Zekthara began updating her report to the Galactic Council. Human Risk Assessment Update, #247. Previous classifications insufficient. Humans do not merely survive in environments lethal to other species, they seek out such environments for recreational purposes. They appear to find pleasure in exposure to biological hazards that would constitute war crimes if deployed by hostile civilizations. Recommendation: do not attempt to establish safety protocols for humans. Their definition of safe recreational activity extends to scenarios that our finest military units would classify as certain death. Personal note: if humans consider sleeping in a toxin-filled forest surrounded by predators to be fun, their military capabilities may be severely underestimated by current intelligence assessments. The next morning, as the humans emerged from their temporary shelter, somehow having survived a full night in the biohazard zone, they began a ritual even more baffling than their initial invasion. They cleaned up their campsite. "They're removing all traces of their presence," Velmore observed. "Why would they maintain environmental standards in a place they treat as a recreational death trap?" Dad was carefully extinguishing their fire pit, while Mom packed away all traces of their occupation. The juveniles were actually collecting small pieces of refuse they hadn't even created, leaving the deadly forest cleaner than they had found. "Because," came the human liaison's voice over the comm, "we want to preserve the wilderness for future generations to enjoy." As the Johnson family walked back toward civilization, chattering happily about their relaxing weekend in nature, Zekthara made a final note in her report. Humans maintain environmental stewardship protocols for planets they simultaneously treat as recreational hazard zones. This species' relationship with danger appears to be based on affection rather than fear. Strongly recommend against challenging humanity to any form of endurance-based conflict. She watched the humans disappear beyond the tree line, already planning their next camping adventure to an even more remote and dangerous location. In the distance, the forest continued its ancient dance of life and death, completely unaware that it had just been classified as a Class 5 biohazard by one species and a perfect family getaway by another.